Congressman Don Bacon, Republican of Nebraska, joins me now. Congressman Bacon, let me start right there with the words we just heard from the president. He says the Russian concessions would be they stop the war. I mean, what do you think is going on here?
Well, that should be the concession, that Russia stops the war. But you get mixed signals from the White House, and I wish they'd be more clear. The initial peace agreement from last week was Ukraine had to give up more land, had to reduce the size of its army, would have to not be allowed to join NATO. You couldn't allow foreign troops into Ukraine. It really was a surrender document that would have left Ukraine weak and vulnerable to Russia for decades to come. I do think that agreement has shifted a little more back towards the middle, but I would like to see the president be a stronger advocate for the free country, the sovereign country of Ukraine that wants to be a democracy, wants to be allied with us, and have a little more clear-eyed view of who Putin is. That, Putin's the invader, he's the dictator, he's murdered all of his opponents. But I just don't see that moral clarity coming from the White House. And, we saw that Wall Street Journal article yesterday that many people around the president are hoping to make billions of dollars. These are all billionaires in their own right, from an agreement from Russia if they get a favorable agreement with Ukraine. That alarms me tremendously. I want to see America be the leader of the free world, standing up for what's right, not for who can make a buck. I don't want to see a foreign policy based on greed. I want to see it based on doing the right thing. I want to be the city on the hill that Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln talked about, and not a country that's pursuing the big dollar.
And Ronald Reagan, too. But let me ask you, Witkoff is going to Moscow, and we heard this week from Vladimir Putin saying that it would be pointless. That was his word. At least that was the translation of his word. It would be pointless to make a peace agreement with Ukraine because Zelensky's government lacks legitimacy. I mean, where could this go?
We need moral clarity dealing with Putin. He does not want a peace agreement with Ukraine that leaves Ukraine a sovereign country that can be allied with the West, that can be part of the EU and free markets. He wants to control another third of Ukraine. He would like to make Ukraine a vassal state. So I don't know why the administration keeps pursuing the pointless here. But yet we see in the Wall Street Journal that there's evidence it's all about trying to make agreements on rare earth minerals and natural gas pipelines and things like that, of which Ukraine has no part of in this. And so Putin does not want peace. The president should see it, and therefore we should be focused on giving high-end weapons, accurate weapons to Ukraine, long-range accurate weapons, and also air defenses that help protect their cities that are being bombed every single night. We need a little more Ronald Reagan here, as you mentioned his name. When he called the Soviet Union an evil empire, this president also needs to see the evil intentions of Putin, but he needs to call it out and see it for what he is.
And let me ask you about the story we've been discussing this morning, the Venezuelan alleged drug boat that was struck one time, but then a second time as two survivors were clinging to the wreckage of the boat. Your committee, you're on the Armed Services Committee, is going to be investigating this, according to your chairman. How concerned are you that this may have been a real violation of the way, even if it's a question of whether or not we're at war, but that this would violate the laws of warfare?
Well, it is a big concern. Now, Secretary of Defense Hegseth denies it. We should get to the truth. I don't think he would be foolish enough to make this decision to say, kill everybody, kill the survivors, because that's a clear violation of the law of war. So I'm very suspicious that he would have done something like that, because it would go against common sense. So let's get the facts. And if the facts go to where the Washington Post article takes it, well, then we'll have to go from there. But if it was as if the article said, that is a violation of the law of war. When people want to surrender, you don't kill them. And they have to pose an imminent threat. It's hard to believe that two people on a raft trying to survive would pose an imminent threat. So let's get the facts first. The Secretary Hegseth deserves his day to present his side of the story.
And your committee will be investigating. Congressman Bacon, thank you very much for joining us.